If you want to learn more about effective management, head over to mattsingers.com and sign up for my free management training.
Welcome to the Mad Singers Management Podcast from madsingers.com, where entrepreneurs and business managers learn and share. If you like the show, don't forget to leave a review.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Today I'm joined by Zach Pritchard. Welcome to the show, Zach.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Excellent. And I'm excited today. We're going to talk about one of my favorite topics on the planet, which is communication. So, Zach, before we jump into it, there's a few people around the globe that still don't know who you are, believe it or not. Would you mind giving a little bit of an introduction to the audience of your background and how you ended up where you are right now?
Yeah, so essentially I started, I graduated college with a wildlife degree, went to managing surface water, so ponds, lakes, and erosion control and stuff like that. But I was managing a company and helped grow it to from 3 employees to 12. Managing operations. So I started to learn a lot about kind of the management aspect, and then once I left there, and I was doing a lot of personal finance coaching at that point with my team at that point, and so I just kind of left that job and just worked my way right into personal finances now. So I'm a financial coach helping people budget and so on. So but there's a story we'll get into with the business on losing or leaving that other job and the communication side of it. So but I won't go too far right now, but it's kind of the short history of kind of where how I got to where I'm at with my own business and what I'm doing now. So
awesome. And yeah, you told me before the show that your passion is around communication, and I'm a huge believer in effective communication, and I've spent many years studying the DISC behavior framework that have helped me personally and pretty much help all of my clients from a communication standpoint. So I'd love to know a little bit more about what you're doing with communication and anything you would like to share, really.
Yeah, so I think it kind of goes all the way back to that the business I was a part of managing. Like I was growing it. I was managing all operations, and so I was hiring, I was firing, I was building a culture. Like my boss was there, and he was helping me at times and kind of my support, so to speak. And but overall, like it was my responsibility to kind of get that going. And after a couple of years into it, I thought I was doing well. I thought I was trying to communicating to the guys, and they didn't want to be there. They didn't care, so to speak. And I made some mistakes on not communicating, or I was communicating the wrong message, so to speak. And so that's what after I ended up losing my job based off probably a several or a list of things that were happening all within like a 6-month or 8-month period. Like I feel like this communication thing was boiling, and then all of a sudden, all the miscommunication that was happening was had kind of blew up there towards the end. And so I think that's one of the reasons that I was let go. But it really made me start to think like, what happened? Like, because I thought I was doing good, and but when I would tell people, hey, tell me what you think, I want to know, I would ask people their opinion, but they wouldn't give me. They wouldn't give me what they really thought. And so it really just made me start thinking about that communication piece. Like, why can't we have an honest conversation? And it was mainly because they didn't trust me in that light of that I would listen to what they had to say. They didn't think I would listen to them. So they thought they would come in and I'm asking for their opinion, but they would, if they gave it to me, that I wouldn't listen. I just, I'm just trying to be the good guy, so to speak, is what I felt like they were being. And so I really dove into like what an honest kind of conversation is, and how we do that, because I think it also plays into our spouses. I mean, our personal lives as well, with our spouse and with family and stuff like that. So the whole idea is that when we're we go about life, we go about the job, we go about everything. We talk about the day-to-day stuff. We talk about the, what has to be talked about that day, but that's as far as we go. Like, with my spouse, it's, the kids, we can talk about work. We talk about what we're doing this weekend. We got to get our, those basic things out of the way. But then at the end of the day, my wife's still like, well, we don't talk much. And I was like, in my head, I'm like, we talked all day long. But it wasn't having that honest conversation to where wasn't a deep level of communication happening. And so that's when I started really diving in. So I started writing this book, and it's basically, you've got 4 avenues and 10 different characteristics. So you've got the 4 main things are your self-communication, your spousal communication, your coworker and team communication, and then you've got the stranger communication. So there's those 4 different main avenues of communication that play into each other. So the idea is that if I don't communicate with myself correctly and have an honest conversation with myself, then I can't communicate with my team. If I can't be honest with who I am, then once I go to work with my team, that I'm portraying that same trust level. If I can't trust myself, then I can't trust, then my team's not going to trust me. And so there's that whole mindset of it. It all begins with yourself. And as you do that, and the idea behind this is to share your opinion to the, nth degree, and don't let somebody's judgment be the barrier that you're not stating your opinion. So in work perspective, if you're in a meeting, a lot of people hate meetings, but if you're in a meeting and you're trying to collaborate on this topic, and maybe I have this idea, or I have whatever, I know what I want to do on this particular topic, but I want other people's opinion. So if I ask other people's opinion, especially if they're my subordinates and I'm managing them, they have a tendency to hesitate to speak their opinion and speak their minds and be against the grain, so to speak. And so I want to encourage that. I want to encourage them to speak up and go against my thoughts and my ideas, because that's what sharpens those ideas. And that's where you get to where that you build that trust within each other. And if there's if they have a space of where they can be open and honest, then it opens that build the trust building over time. And so you'll end up creating an atmosphere where everybody has this mentality of, I'm not going against you just because I think you're stupid or I think you're dumb or whatever. It's just the way I feel based on my experiences, my ability to solve a problem. That's the way I feel. And so I think we get wrapped up into what people think of us. And so we don't want to say something because we don't want to they don't want to feel stupid, or we don't want them to feel stupid, or we don't want to be mean or anything like that. But I think we need to kind of sit back and just think about what that, what it really means to be honest with each other. But it all begins with yourself.
I really like that, because it goes back to the fundamentals, what I teach with people management, right? Because the first and the most important thing that I always say is that the key thing when you're working with staff is to build a good relationship. Because the problem in most cases, when people don't open up, it's really because you haven't built a good relationship with you, right? So the way you're saying it, if people don't trust you, they won't open up. And you can, so many managers I've worked with, they're like, oh yeah, if you ever have anything, my door is always open and I have open door policy. But that doesn't particularly breathe trust, right? So having saying that people can always come and talk, and actually from that being possible, is 2 very different things. And again, what happens when you talk, right? So again, fundamentally, one of the key things that I always talk about when I train people is really when you're in meetings as the boss, you always want to speak last, right? Because as the boss, what you have to realize is that you hold in your hands the keys for your staff for them to, make a living. And because you control their salary, you basically control if they can live and eat, right? So even though some people will be confident talking against you and, disagreeing with you, a lot of the time, in many, many cases, if you've already spoken your opinion, you are less likely to get the opinion of some of your staff members, right? So one of the key things, and this is hard for many people, but learning to actually let your staff speak before you utter your opinion makes such a big difference, because it makes them feel listened to. And even when you, let's call it, quote, know the right answer, the goal is not getting to the right answer very quickly. The goal is to actually be effective and get to the right answer with the staff's buy-in, right? And if you're just telling people what to do, so a very simple example of this is if you tell people what to do and you're like, okay, Paul, go do this project, this is what you need to do, etc., etc., the output you will get compared to if Paul figures out, he needs to do this project by himself and he's like, oh, we should really do this project. The ownership he takes and the delivery that he delivers from figuring that out himself and driving that, rather than you telling him to do it, is miles and miles and miles apart, right?
Absolutely. No, I think that's key, and that's probably, there's a big part there, because I'm the talker. I'm gonna speak my opinion pretty easily. My opinion comes out, and so especially the fact that I was in the business and I was out in the field. I started in the field. I worked my way up into management, and so I had done anything. Like, there was a point where there was 3 of us in the company, and I wore a lot of hats at that point, and so I guess there's that level of pride for me. It's like when they would come and complain about what they're doing in the field, it's like, like I don't have any sympathy for you, because I've been there and I've done that. I know what it's like, and maybe I was probably a little too arrogant and too prideful in those situations. But I think that's where the characteristics of communication, whether it be our perspective, the trust that you have, the expectations weren't set right. And that's a lot of times what happens too, is that just the expectation wasn't set right. And so there was a miscommunication in those, trying to align those expectations. I say do this, and he's thinking do that. And we don't, like, maybe there's that vibe that we know there's a disconnect there, but we don't act on it, and we just let it go. And then you find out later that you should have acted on it because you knew there was a miscommunication there. And I think that's, a lot of another aspect of this is awareness. Is if you are aware that there's some miscommunication, act on it right then. Don't wait till you find out that the project's going to go 10 degrees off the path because you didn't act on that communication that you could see wasn't there.
Yeah. I think one thing that I see a lot that's super relevant to this, right, is the fact that when people grow up within the business, particularly when they're very detail oriented and like you, they've gone through all the roles. The problem is often that within the business, they stay the expert, right? And they stay the person that knows it all, and they don't let go, right? And the challenge with that, when new people come in, like, because they've grown up through the company, what typically happens is they got a ton of responsibility, right? When they grew up in the business, they were basically forced to figure it all out themselves, which have made them really smart people. But the challenge at the same time with that is that they expect that anyone else can do that from a different position. So very often people don't realize that someone you just bring into the business don't have your level of understanding yet. And therefore, very, very often what tend to happen is that, people are expecting others to pick it up in 5 minutes because now they know it. But a lot of times when I sit down with people and say, well, do you remember the first time you did this? how long did it take you, right? And
Yeah.
did you get it all right the first time? And in most cases, no. But it's
No.
so far away from them, and their understanding is so much higher that it's logic. But particularly when you're hiring people below you, and particularly if you're an entrepreneur yourself, you know the whole business. You have the overview in your head of how the business work. If you hire someone in a lower level role, they generally only see their piece and they only understand a piece of their piece, right? So, and it can be really difficult to actually understand what people understand about your business, and even simple decisions where you're like, oh, why would you ever do that? But it's not because people are purposely doing bad things. Like, no one wakes up in the morning and say, I want to go to work and do a bad job. Like, they don't, right? So if people are not doing a good job, it's generally lack of communication on some level, lack of training or the likes, or occasionally it's the wrong person in the wrong seat, right? So sometimes you'll find people who just shouldn't be doing that job because it doesn't fit their natural personality, right? So for yourself, like, you know, if I give you a job that includes a bunch of spreadsheets and numbers, you'd be comfortable with it, right? But some people, when they see a spreadsheet and 10 numbers, they get dizzy and, you know, they can't handle it. And it's not about being stupid or not understanding it, but it's just different people's natural behavior matches different types of strength and so on, right? So that's definitely been my experience. So that's really cool.
No, absolutely. You're right on track there. So I think I think that was the miscommunication was a big reason why I had ended up ultimately getting let go. I wasn't communicating with the team right. I wasn't allowing this atmosphere to be there all the while, because they were scared that if they went against my opinion, that they would get fired, or they would not, they were worried about their jobs at that point. So, they're going to save their livelihood and not say anything. They're just going to suck it up and do it. And that's not the atmosphere I was trying to create, but ultimately it was what I created. And so that's what kind of brought me to digging into that, like you said, that understanding that connection of trust and expectations, and, how this communication piece really works, and so on and so forth. So,
that makes a lot of sense. So you have a book on the way. How far are you with the book, and when do you expect it to be released, and so on?
I'm a few chapters in. I think I'm hoping for kind of finishing up towards the end of the year, and then I'll start, getting it. I'm going to start talking with some publishers and stuff, getting it, at least pre-planned to launch and stuff like that. So I don't have a date yet, but my goal for finishing it is the end of the year. And then I'll start editing and doing that type of thing. So hopefully pretty soon at the beginning of the year, we can have something kind of getting ready to launch. So, but they can follow me. We're going to kind of set up a page on our website here this week and kind of get stuff going so that people can follow us and kind of follow the tracking of it, and kind of go from there.
Excellent. And just without ruining all the content of the book, but can you give us a very quick tip or something that, from a communication standpoint, that you feel people can take and use straight away, like something that's, valuable to them and relatively easy to implement?
I think there's two main tips there that I would say. The first one is it all starts with yourself. Like, you have to do the self-communication, the self-awareness to understand who you are, understand how you think, how you operate, what your perspective is. In each of these characteristics of the communication in my book, there's 10 different characteristics. In each of them, there's a that self piece. Like, you have to have the self perspective, the self trust, the self expectations, the self, communication, self empathy, self awareness. So those are the things because it all starts with yourself. Because when you go to communicate with other people, if you don't trust yourself, then they're going to have a hard time trusting you.
Yep.
It's having that self-confidence and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's the number one. And then number two would be just don't be afraid to be vulnerable in a conversation at work. Like, share your mistakes. That's where we grow, and that's what happens. When you're in a meeting, don't be afraid to share your opinion. And then if you feel it's going to be maybe a little targeting to somebody, whether it's saying, like, if it may come across to some people as mean or derogative or whatever, then just state that. Say, I don't mean this in this way. I'm having trouble kind of putting it in a way that's not mean or derogative, but this is what I think we should do, and it's not against your opinion, not against your idea. It's just the way I see it from my perspective. So you just got to communicate, just do a little bit more clear communication in there, and speak your complete opinion, speak your whole mind, so to speak. Don't just hide stuff and kind of beat around the bush just so you don't hurt people's feelings. Just state that I don't mean to hurt people's feelings, but I'm going to say this because this is what I feel we should do. And so I think if you do that, it'll help open that communication up a little bit.
So one of the key things when you're working with different personalities is definitely understanding how they communicate, right? So one of the fundamental lessons that I learned very early on was the fact that communication is what the listener do. In other words, it's not what you say, it's how people hear what you say, right? And that's very, very fundamental for communication to understand that, because you can say everything with the right intention, but if you actually get to know people, and a part of the disc that I spend a lot of time learning and utilizing, right? Part of that is understanding basically who needs what served in what way. Because fundamentally there's some people that, no matter how little harm you mean to them or whatever, effectively, if you say something that they perceive as, negative or against them, they will be very, very uncomfortable. And it's not necessarily because they don't like having honest conversations, but it's more the way they have honest conversation is probably very different than how many other people have it, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely, yeah.
Really, really learning to understand different personalities, at least for me, have been an absolute game changer, because just like yourself, like I see things pretty straightforward, right? And I'm generally in a situation where, I don't take things personal. So if people say, I have a stupid suggestion or whatever, like, it's not something that I take personal in any way, but I've totally learned to understand how others would feel that to be very aggressive, as an example, right?
Yeah, I mean, and I think a lot of people, especially if you're married, can relate to that one, because your spouse has their perspective, and I mean, those can be some touchy conversations if you say things the wrong way, and or they may, but they're hearing it one way, doesn't mean that's the way you meant it to be said. And so that's what this whole book is kind of, it's a big spider web, if you will. Like, all these different avenues and characteristics that I'm talking about, they're all intertwined. And because if I have a bad conversation with my wife one morning, I go to work, I'm already mad, I'm already agitated, so things can get heated at work, and the conversations at work are twisted because I'm already aggravated. So you kind of start this chain of events if things are out of whack at the beginning. So it's all kind of intertwined in this, and one side of it affects the other side, and all that kind of stuff. So but one thing I always told my guys while I was there, and this is what I was trying to figure out while I was there, but it's funny how you can't see it until you step back and you kind of look back into it, that situation, you start to realize what was going on. But I always told them, though, I was like, don't hesitate to communicate. Like, that's it. I mean, that was what I said almost every meeting was, don't hesitate to communicate. Like, if you think you need to say something more, say something more. Go a little
Yeah.
farther.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Very interesting, Zach. Very interesting. Now, we talked just before we started here, we talked a little bit about finance as well. And it was one of those very interesting pieces, right? Because I've worked with many, many different clients and quite a few sort of smaller business owners. And one of the things I see consistently is people struggling with finance, to put it politely, screw up everything else. And what I mean with that is that if people are considering or struggling with paying the monthly bills, everything else basically stays out of their head, right? In the sense of they end up in a position where they make bad choices because they're in a tough spot, right? And it's both bad business choices, but it's also bad or potentially bad personal choices, right? And I think very, very often when you see individuals run a business and really haven't got the finances under control, that can be difficult. But I think as much, like particularly for entrepreneurs, right? Because for many entrepreneurs, personal finance and business finance become very interlinked, right? If they have a good month, they pay themselves a good salary. And if they have a bad month, they pay themselves a bad salary. And, it's very interesting how that drive both the mood, but also the sort of decisions they take. So what's sort of your take on it, and how do you actually work with people in terms of finance?
So basically, it's the whole point of how I got into personal finance coaching. Like besides the fact of me learning it and doing it myself, like learning how to budget and being debt free and not having any risk out there. I now have a house mortgage, and that's it. That's all, the only debt I have. But going back into that business I was running, or I was helping run. The guys we were running machines, heavy machinery, excavators, skid steers. We were, driving all over the Metroplex up here in Dallas. And so these guys needed to focus on what they were doing, or they were going to screw something up in the field. And I'm guilty of it too. Like if I had something going on at home or whatever, then my focus is not on what I'm doing at work. It's on what I'm doing, what was going on at home. And so if I was running a machine, or if I was running an excavator every single day basically, or some sort of machinery every day. We had amphibious machines that we were running, so some of these they're not cheap machines, and so and we're working around water, so there's a lot of potential for some big things to happen with these machines. And so what I found was that this guy was so tight with his personal finances at home, like living paycheck to paycheck, not even sure he can make his rent payment by the end of the week. And he's got 5 boys, and they lived in a 2-bedroom, like 1,200 square foot house. Like he was just, they were just out of control and couldn't figure out what was going on. And so it just really made me, like, I knew his focus was not at work. And so he was he was great, had a great work ethic. He would work for 15 hours a day if he had to, but he was just struggling in that mindset to stay focused. And so what we started doing was actually teaching our guys personal finance at work. Like we offered that as a benefit to them, and I was the one teaching them because I enjoyed it so much and was already teaching other people and helping people, or family and friends. So I started teaching them and helping them kind of start to get control of their budget, start to get control of their behaviors around the finances. And so I started doing that for every new employee we had. They went through this program and tried to help them. And it was, at the time, it was Dave Ramsey's. I don't know if any of your audience know who Dave Ramsey is, but it's basically, it's a simple program of just 7 baby steps. You save money, you pay off all your debt, and then you start investing for kids' college and retirement. So the whole idea is to get control so that you have peace and freedom in your budget, and you're not worried about, are you going to make your house payment, or is your lights going to get cut off on Friday, or Because if that's the case, you're not focused on work, and you can make a lot of mistakes in that way. And so we started teaching them as a benefit to them, to help them, because we knew if we did that and it started working, then they would be more focused at work and they would not be as distracted. And so they would actually be more efficient with the job, because number one, we're not making mistakes, so I don't have to go back to the job. Number two, they're more efficient on the job, so they get done quicker, because they're focused on what they're doing, and they don't have to, they're not back and forth, forgetting this or forgetting that or whatever. And so, you just you get a higher profit margin in that job, and you don't have to go back. I mean, so you just start creating better income limits at that point. You have a better, you serve the client more. So there's a whole lot of avenues of why we were doing it for our team, and we were starting to see some benefits of it before I left. Even though there were still some communication errors there on my part, but we were starting to see a lot of things like that. So that's what I do now for businesses, is that I do I can do group coaching, I can do personal coaching for their team, however they want to do it, so that I'm helping them, partnering with that business to help them, allow their team to be focused on work when they're at work and focused on home when they're at home. And that's the whole idea.
Nice. Yeah, that's very good. I mean, I have a lot of staff in the Philippines, and they are, they're generally not very good with financial literacy, right? And we've definitely had some people that have benefited hugely from some support in that area, right? Because typically, in Philippines, people usually get paid every 2 weeks, because if you pay them for a full month, they'll spend all the money in the first week or so, and they won't actually eat for 3 weeks. So it's and unfortunately that's a cultural thing, right? But I can totally relate to what you're saying. So
people do that here too. They just grab a credit card to spend the rest of the 3 weeks on. That's what happens, and so they end up with $1,000 of debt because they weren't paying attention to that money, and they were just letting it was just flying out the door.
Yeah. And that's, it is, one of the key things for me, and what I feel is the biggest shame, is you have so much money and so much time being spent in school systems all around the world, but literally anyone, majority of people at least, walking out of the, after being in school for 10, 12, 15 years or whatever, majority of people don't know basic stuff like, how does a mortgage work? How does credit cards work? How does, these simple things, and they aren't particularly complex, but just the fact that they're never really taught in detail, like the fact that, even the most basic things of how to live a life, that those things are not actually being focused on and taught to a certain level of details is just so, it's such a shame, really, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think you're right. You're spot on there, because but I wonder, people think it's some parents may think it's a school problem. The school thinks it's a parenting issue, that maybe the parents need to teach them about the money or whatever. But it's just the fact that nobody's teaching them. And that's the issue, is, it's not coming from anybody. And maybe the parents don't know.
My problem is just, that's often the problem, right? But fundamentally, the key thing for me is how you can actually teach someone mathematics. And, sometimes you go through interest rate and you do that sort of stuff in school. But the point is, no one still actually explains, how does it work? I went to school for a bunch of years. Right? But at no point did anyone sit down and, say, okay, today we're going to figure out how does credit cards work, right? How do you make sure you don't get into more debt than you can handle? And simple things like that. And compared to the level of math you learn in school with, very, very complicated stuff, it's so freaking weird that those basic things like mortgages and credit cards and stuff is not taught. And it might be in many countries a purpose choice somehow, that, they don't want people to understand because it keeps up consummation. But yeah.
Well, I wonder if it's because it's so personal, like that personal finance is like you start to get into how that person behaves with money, and so that's where nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to say, I struggle in this. I struggle with overspending here. I struggle with overspending there. I know, especially in the States, like there's a lot of people that struggle with overspending in the restaurant category. There's people that'll spend a couple $1,000s a month and going out to eat, and it's just nothing to them. But so I don't know if it's that piece where it's just that personal connection and that personal behavior around it but there's no even, like you said, there's no even basic knowledge of, hey, this is the basics of finances, like the basic of a mortgage, the basic of credit cards, the basics of, how do they come up with a credit score, all that kind of stuff. Like these are the basics, and that's all you build your own understanding from there. Like, I mean, like you said, I went through, high school, went through college, and didn't really have a finance. I think we had an economy class in high school, but it was like half the year or whatever, and that was all that we got. And it was more government, economy, overall, like way overhead idea of supply and demand. That was basically all that we got.
Yeah.
I had to learn all the finance stuff on my own, and listening and reading, all that kind of stuff. So,
but even simple things, right? Like everyone still walks around and say, oh, you should own your own house to live in because that's a good idea. The thing is, when you start learning finance, you realize that might not be a good idea for many, many people, right? But even simple things like that, like that's something that keeps going on for generations, just because everyone is told as a kid that, that's a great idea. They keep telling the same thing to everyone they know, right? And very, very few people I've ever met actually sat down and done the calculation, right? Now, luckily I have pretty entrepreneurial friends, so definitely some of them have done it. But just if you look at it in a high level perspective, like so many people have no idea, right?
No, for sure. And I think that's, where if you're not intentional about teaching your kids that, they're going to grow up the same way you did. And so, that's, because we're in a generation of everybody lives paycheck to paycheck. And if that's normal for your parents, and if you don't grow up thinking, I don't want to live that way, and start looking for another option, you're going to grow up living that way. And you think that's just how it's supposed to be done. And that's where I was. Like watched my parents live paycheck to paycheck, struggle as we were going through school. And I just finally told myself as I graduated high school, like, I don't want to live that way. I don't want to be in that always high stress mode, with my finances. And so I was like, there's got to be another way. So I started looking, started reading, and I started finding out the basics of finance. And so it kind of helped me understand. And then I dove in more. I dove in to want to know the full details of everything. It's not just the basics, but that was my choice. But I think everybody needs to have some level of the basics for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Zach, that was a very, very interesting discussion, and I'm sure the audience will enjoy that a lot as well. So thank you very, very much for joining today's episode. Just before we finish up, any sort of tips or any particular resources or the links that you would like to recommend for the audience?
Yeah, so I have I've got a free webinar coming up on, I'm not sure when we'll air this and whatnot, but I'll be doing multiples of these. So they just need to go on my website, and it's aafinancialcoaching.com/webinars. And we'll be doing free webinars to kind of build you a foundation around your finances, just to kind of help give you some tips and stuff to what to think about, how to look at that. We can, we do budget reviews in that regard. So if you're just stuck in your budget and you need to kind of revamp it, then that's a good way to do that. So it's a good place for them to go, that they can kind of keep up with the when the webinars are, and kind of sign up for those as they go. So
excellent. And Zach, I'll make sure we include all your sort of communication and your website and so on in the show notes. So thank you very much for coming on the show today.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me.
Excellent. And for the listeners, we'll be back again next week. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Please leave a review. It means the world to us. You can also learn more about management at madsingers.com.